There is a name the British royal family uses for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Not Harry, not Meghan, not even the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. When courtiers inside Buckingham Palace are forced to acknowledge that the couple exists at all, they reach for 4 words. Persons who live overseas. That is it. No title, no warmth, no acknowledgement of blood or history, or the fact that one of those persons is the son of the King of England. Just a bureaucratic phrase so cold it barely qualifies as a description. You just heard it. That is the nickname. And now, let me tell you why it is so much more devastating than it first sounds. Because to understand what those 4 words really mean, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to 2020, not to the Oprah interview, all the way back to what this family was and what it lost, and why it cannot bring itself to say their names out loud. Because here is what you need to hold in your mind at the same time. Right now, in their home in Montecito, California, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry call each other H and M. Single letters, an intimate shorthand that started, according to Meghan herself, at the very beginning of their relationship, when everything had to be in code, when no one could know who she was dating, when the whole world would have descended on them the moment the secret got out. She talked about it on the Jamie Kern-Lima podcast in April of last year. She said they were on just a letter basis because she could not tell anyone who she was seeing, and he was keeping the secret too, and so they reduced each other to initials, the way people do when they are hiding something precious from the rest of the world. The letters stuck. 7 years of marriage later, 4 years of a very public war with the institution that made him, 2 children born in California, far from anything Harry once called home, and they are still H and M to each other. 2 people who built their own private language when the pressure of the outside world became too loud to bear. H and M in California. Persons who live overseas in London. The same 2 people, 2 completely different stories about who they are and whether they still matter. Craig Brown, the royal author, documented the palace's language in his book A Voyage Around the Queen. His source was not a tabloid gossip. It was broadcaster Giles Brandreth, a man who has spent decades in proximity to the royal family, who understands its rhythms and its silences better than almost any outsider alive. Brandreth told Brown that the names of Harry and Meghan simply do not crop up very often in court circles anymore, and when they do, courtiers flinch, almost imperceptibly, and change the subject. Not dramatically, not with visible emotion, just the smallest, most controlled adjustment, a pivot in conversation, a sentence that quietly turns in a different direction. And when they cannot change the subject fast enough, they deploy the phrase, persons who live overseas. The Earl of Snowdon, quoted in the same book, offered the coldest possible summary of how the royal family handles anything painful or difficult. He said, and these are his words, "The royal family is quite good at blanking out anything unpleasant or uncomfortable." Blanking out. Not reconciling, not grieving, not processing at a family dinner or in a private phone call, or in any of the 100 ordinary human ways that estrangement actually gets worked through between people who once shared a life. Blanking. The active, deliberate, institutionally coordinated erasure of a presence that has become too complicated to acknowledge directly. That word choice is worth sitting with for a moment, because it tells you something about the architecture of this family that no Netflix documentary and no memoir, not even Spare, with all its raw and furious detail, has ever quite captured from the outside. The British monarchy does not do visible grief. It does not do public rupture. It does not hold press conferences about estrangement or publish statements about what it feels like to lose a son and a brother and a daughter-in-law in a single, public, globally televised collapse that played out across 3 continents and multiple streaming platforms. It blanks. It reaches for neutral administrative language. It refers to people it cannot bear to name as persons who live overseas, as if Harry were a distant cousin who moved to New Zealand for work, rather than the prince who stood in a London courtroom in January of this year, voice cracking, telling a judge that the tabloids had made his wife's life an absolute misery, and that his own life had been commercialised since he was a teenager. That man was in London for weeks. His father was in England. His brother was in England. Neither of them came to see him. And when people inside the palace were asked about any of it, they smiled briefly and said, "We wish them all the best," and nothing else. The phrase is so practiced it has the quality of a reflex, a social immune response to an uncomfortable stimulus. But here is the thing about blanking out. It requires energy. It requires sustained, active effort to suppress a name, to train an entire court of people to flinch in unison on cue, to replace a human being with a geographic category, and maintain that replacement across years of news cycles and book releases and tabloid front pages and legal filings that keep pulling the name back into the room whether anyone wants it there or not. You do not expend that kind of institutional energy on someone who does not matter to you. You do not teach your courtiers to flinch at the name of a stranger. You teach them to flinch at the name of someone who was supposed to be part of all this, who sat at the Christmas table at Sandringham, who walked beside the king when he was still the prince, who carried a title that was supposed to mean something permanent and found a way to make it mean something else entirely. The flinch that Brandreth describes is not indifference. It is managed pain wearing the costume of indifference. It is an institution doing what institutions do when they cannot afford to feel things openly. It is grief in a suit. And the contrast with where Harry and Meghan started inside that institution makes all of this even sharper and more painful to look at directly. When they were working royals, when they were still inside the machine, still doing the walkabouts and the hospital visits and the Commonwealth tours and the Remembrance Day ceremonies, their protection officers gave them call signs. Harry was David Stevens. Meghan was Davina Scott, DS, Duke and Duchess of Sussex, encoded into the most ordinary pair of British names imaginable. There is something almost tender about that. The people whose job it was to keep them alive chose names that made them sound like a couple you might meet at a village fete, like neighbours who would wave at you from across the street on a Sunday morning. William was Danny Collins. Kate was Daphne Clark. 4 people embedded in a system that needed to protect them and chose to do it with a kind of warmth, with the small private humour that develops between people who share a high-pressure job and need to find ways to make it human. Now, the institution has a different kind of codename for 2 of them. Not a call sign chosen by people trying to keep them safe, an administrative label chosen by people trying to keep their distance. Persons who live overseas. Private individuals. Former working royals. The language keeps evolving in the same direction, toward abstraction, toward bureaucratic distance, toward the grammatical equivalent of a door that has been very quietly but very firmly closed and is not expected to open again anytime soon. There is another layer here that almost no one is talking about, and it connects directly to what is happening with this family right now in the spring of 2026. Harry has just come through a 9-week trial in London, fighting Associated Newspapers, the publisher of the Daily Mail, over allegations of unlawful information gathering that he says poisoned his private life for decades. He sat at a witness stand in the Royal Courts of Justice and described how the relentless press coverage had placed a massive strain on his personal relationships, how he had long held the media responsible for the death of his mother, how the tabloids had made Meghan's life a misery. He was emotional on the stand. He was visibly fighting for something he believes in with the full weight of everything he has. And then he flew back to California. And in London, the people who share his blood went back to referring to him as a person who lives overseas. The distance between those two realities is not political. It is not strategic. It is the specific, irreducible distance between a family that has chosen institutional survival over personal repair and a man on the other side of the world who is still, in court and on record, fighting battles that trace directly back to what that institution put him through. Meghan's account of how H&M began makes all of this land even harder. She said it started because she could not tell anyone who she was dating. Everything was in code. The secrecy that was supposed to be temporary, a workaround for a few weeks of privacy before the news broke, before the world found out, became the most durable thing they built together. While everything around them shifted, titles and residences and television deals and charitable foundations and public perception and the friendship with the Beckhams and the deal with Netflix and the lifestyle brand and all of it, while all of that moved and changed and complicated and in some cases collapsed, the letters stayed. H.M. Two initials that mean I see you when no one else is allowed to. That is what they kept. That is the thing that did not get renegotiated or restructured or quietly walked back in a press statement. There are two worlds in this story right now. One of them is a palace in London, where an institution that has existed for 1,000 years has decided that the most dignified response to one of its most dramatic internal ruptures is to refer to the people involved as persons who live overseas, to train its courtiers to flinch, to smile briefly when pressed, and offer nothing more than we wish them all the best. The other is a house in California, where two people still reach for each other with a single letter, because that is what was left when everything else got too complicated and too public and too painful to hold on to. Both of those things are true at the same time, and between them, in the space where a family used to be, there is a silence so loud and so carefully maintained that 4 words have had to be invented just to fill it. Persons who live overseas. It is the saddest kind of nickname, not cruel enough to be honest, not warm enough to be human, just clinical enough to pretend that what was lost was not a son, just distant enough to pretend that what was broken was not something that mattered. The flinch tells you otherwise. It always does.